James wore a baggy pair of blue jeans but remained shirtless. I figured it's likely because he didn't need the coat anymore to hide them. I noticed how thin he's gotten. His ribs poked out through his chest, and his arms were skeletal and bony. He was so paper thin it looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks. He stopped a few meters from the bed and smirked at me. "Hey Katie," he said softly, still wearing that grating smile. I kept my face stony and devoid of emotion, except for the slight rage that peeked through. "Katie, I promise I'm not going to hurt you." "You fucking kidnapped me, you psycho," I snapped, my voice sharp and seething with hatred. "And now you have me tied down. You honestly want me to believe you won't hurt me?" "Look, I know you're mad, but I'll explain everything soon," he said as he inched closer to plop next to me on the bed. He moved his hands to stroke me on the cheek before softly whispering his next words. "But before I do, I want you to meet my new family." He stood up, placed his fingers over his mouth to whistle loudly. I instantly heard the sound of what sounded like a million scuttling footsteps approaching us. I realized he was calling them, and like well-trained dogs they came running. I turned my neck in different directions to look, but they weren't there. I realized that they were crawling in from the ceiling again. As much as I strained my neck, it was hard to angle it in such a way that I could spot the creatures. James saw me struggling and helped prop me up by the chin with his hand, so I could finally see the ceiling. There were dozens of them that had emerged from the dark recesses of the ceiling to flood above us. I'd already partially seen how they looked previously in my bedroom, but this time I was aided by the bright lights to see their appearance in painful detail. Their oval bodies were covered in an outer, glossy casing like an exoskeleton that shimmered silver. They had a slightly segmented body like a millipede. Their multitude of furry, dark red legs radiated out from their bodies. I counted and discovered that each one had 12. Worst of all was their eyes that dotted the segment of their body that belonged to their head. 5 of them. Each glowed like a golden emerald, watching me unblinkingly. "Do you see how intently they're watching you? They love seeing their new mom," James whispered, though I tried my best to ignore his voice. One thing I noticed, too, was the cacophony of sounds they made. It sounded like a chorus of chattering and clicking noises that might have emanated from their mouths. Like they were talking with each other. James then snapped the fingers of the free hand that wasn't holding me up, and made 3 clicking sounds with them which echoed up towards the horde of creatures at the ceiling. It seemed like he was signaling for them, because one of the creatures detached from the ceiling, and dropped down. I thought it would hurtle to the floor, but I was surprised as it unsheathed wings it kept hidden within the folds of its body. It fluttered gracefully to the floor to land next to James. I noted it reached James's knee in terms of height. "This one's name is Daphne," James said as he motioned toward the monstrosity that stood next to him. I nearly giggled at the fact that he actually gave this disgusting thing a name, but I was too dazed and shocked at its sight to laugh. James let go of my chin, seeing how I didn't need to stare at the ceiling anymore. I watched as he moved his hand to stroke and caress the creature on its underbelly. He scratched it lovingly like one would do to a dog's belly. The worst part is I could hear the creature purr in pleasure like a cat would. "Daphne's pregnant, you know," James spoke as he continued to caress her belly, "and she's just looking for a new place to plant her new eggs." "What?" was the only word I could mouth as I fumbled to understand what he was saying. "I would let her use my body again, but unfortunately I feel drained from the last batch," he continued to ramble on. "James," I muttered in a low, dangerous voice. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Well, in simple terms, the babies complete a part of their life cycle in a human host. Think of it like being a second mom for these babies, Katie." I saw the creature Daphne lift its wings and whiz into the air before hovering above me and landing on my back. I felt its furry legs brush against my skin. "No. James, no. Please stop it." I struggled hopelessly against my restraints as I continued to plead with James to let me go. My mouth was agape and I heaved for breath in a flurry of panic. I felt it crouch low onto my back and deposit the eggs onto multiple spots on my back. I don't know how long the ordeal lasted for. It could have been a few minutes. maybe an hour. Then the creature opened its wings and flapped away again. It was done with my body. James approached me and I felt him plant a greasy kiss on my cheek. My eyes were shut as tears flowed through them, and I shook helplessly in my spot, lacking the strength to even turn my cheek away. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" he asked rhetorically, knowing I couldn't answer in my state. His last words unsettled me with their ominous meaning. "Don't worry. You'll grow attached to them. Just like how I did." The first half of the month was pure torture. James force-fed me while I laid face down in the bed, in my chains. He tried to make conversation with me, but he'd be met with my silence. I want to say the worst part was feeling the eggs on my back. But, weirdly enough, they didn't hurt like I expected them to. Sure, I was getting a bit thinner as I felt the eggs grow, but I didn't feel pain or anything. And I know it sounds twisted for me to admit, but it kind of felt fascinating to feel the life in the eggs grow on my back. I could eventually feel them wriggle and move about in my skin, but honestly it just tickled, and at times I giggled from the sensation. Eventually their birth occurred 3 weeks later. When they hatched, I tried acting disgusted when I saw the larvae crawl out from my back, but I didn't. I simply felt a strange feeling of accomplishment surge through me, knowing I played a huge role in creating and nurturing these creatures to life, like a mother. They might look ugly on the outside, but they are sweethearts once you get to know them. Over time I accustomed myself to stroking and petting them. The way they purred in response was cute. I grew to understand their clicks and calls. I'd whistle for them to come to me. Eventually James even let me out of my chains and monitored me while I played with them, making sure I wouldn't run away. I wouldn't do such an absurd thing anyways. I'd never abandon my babies. It's cheesy to say, but I think James was right when he said I'd grow attached to them. James recently spoke to me and said he wants us to be a happy family and that we can't keep hiding ourselves in this abandoned building if we should prosper. I agree. We are currently making plans to one day emerge and make the world accept us and our children. I want to extend a massive thank you to all our listeners for being part of our exciting episode. Your support is what makes this podcast possible, and we are thrilled to have you with us on this journey. If you enjoyed our adventure into the unknown today, please share this podcast with your fellow thrill seekers. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll dive into another captivating story full of mysteries and spine-tingling chills. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on any upcoming stories. Until next time, keep your eyes open, your hearts brave, and your lights on. After all, you never know what's lurking in the shadows. This is your host, signing off. Stay safe and keep exploring the unexplored.